Once again, it's time for Horticultural Production Systems, and here's the second part of my lecture on climate change and phenology modeling in horticulture. In the first part, I talked about climate change, and this time it's time for phenology modeling in horticulture. My name is Eike Luedeling, and I'm going to guide you through this lecture. What I want to talk today about is bud dormancy in deciduous trees. You've all seen deciduous trees. We're in the temperate zone, and deciduous trees are most trees that we have here. They're the ones that lose their leaves in winter and fall dormant. Now, you all know about the different stages that trees go through. Most of you have learned it in primary school, the ordinary seasons that we all learn about. What I'm most interested in is the winter season, when it seems like the trees are sleeping, look almost dead. There's no leaves on the branches, and it seems like they're not doing very much. But what is going on here? Trees suspend their development in winter to avoid frost damage. That's the reason for losing the leaves in the first place. And in order to wake up again, they need to know when spring starts, when it's safe again to come out and grow these sensitive tissues in their leaves. And in order to know when spring starts, they require exposure to chill and heat in order to resume active growth. But how exactly does this work? What are the chilling and heat needs of tree cultivars, and how will global warming affect this? These are questions that my working group is very interested in, and we're actively doing research on, and this is why I'm excited to be able to talk to you about this today. Ultimately, the question is, how do we manage this process in an orchard, and how do we ensure that the orchards that many farmers depend on are fit for the future that is likely going to be a little bit warmer than the current time? What we are pretty sure about is that buds during winter undergo several stages of winter dormancy. At some point in maybe late summer or early fall, buds establish their dormancy and enter what is known as the endodormancy period. This is followed by a so-called ecodormancy, which eventually is terminated by bud burst. Now, the difference between these two dormancy stages is as follows. During endodormancy, buds accumulate chill, so basically they need to be exposed to cold temperatures, and the meristems are unable to grow, even if we put them under favorable external conditions. So we can put them into a greenhouse under otherwise ideal growing conditions, and they will not break and not develop leaves or flowers. This changes during ecodormancy. This is after endodormancy has been released, has been broken, and buds are now receptive to heat, and the meristems can resume growth after they've become exposed to sufficient heat. Now, obviously, this aligns with the sequence of time through the winter, and we know that at some point during the winter, the endodormancy is broken and the buds become receptive to heat. And this is what the buds look in the different dormancy stages. These are cherry buds. And you can see the development through time here in these images. Do you see much development? Well, I don't either. The buds don't visibly change during dormancy, and this is the main difficulty. It's very difficult to know when these chilling requirements are fulfilled, and this has been a major challenge for model developers. Because we know that chill accumulates through the season until some point when endodormancy is reached. We assume that there's a chilling requirement that buds have fulfilled at this point, and possibly afterwards, partly overlapping, they will then accumulate heat. So they become receptive to heat at some point at the end of endodormancy, and after they fulfilled their heat requirement, we will see bud break and bloom eventually. Problem here that this, even though we're pretty sure that in general this pattern is true, this is probably a bit too simplistic. It seems that this strictly sequential accumulation, so first the chilling and then the heat, is a little bit oversimplified. It's probably not that easy. And there are also theories of simultaneous accumulation, that chill and heat basically accumulate at the same time, or that there is an overlap in the accumulation times. So what has become quite established is that during the breaking of dormancy, the chill and heat requirements may actually interact. This means that there's a minimum, a critical chilling requirement that needs to be fulfilled, and any additional chill that accumulates on top of this critical requirement can reduce the forcing requirement, so can reduce the heat needs. The first illustration of this that I know of was developed by Harrington et al. And published in 2010. And what's illustrated here is that there's that there are various combinations of chill and heat that can lead to bud burst. And that's illustrated by this possibility line here. And you see that this describes various combinations of the forcing needs here, the heat needs that are needed, the heat accumulation that is needed, and the chilling units here on the x-axis. So we could have, in this particular example, we could have bud burst after 1500 chill units and 500 heat units, or after 2500 chill units and then only about 400. But even up here, after only 500 chill units and, well, roughly 2200 heat units. This, however, is in this illustration the critical chilling requirement, below which we will not really easily see bud burst. Bud burst is not possible anywhere in this area here. It is possible when we've reached these critical combinations, or these possible combinations of chill and heat accumulation. This concept is almost certainly closer to the truth than the sequential or the parallel models, but it's unfortunately a bit more complicated and makes modeling phenology even a little bit harder if we know that there's not this kind of hard combination of chilling and heat requirements, but this kind of fuzzy possibility line with all kinds of combinations actually being potentially conducive to bud burst. A major problem has been how to quantify chill, because of course to do any sort of meaningful work in this space, we need to find a way to measure the things that we want to observe. And so chilling requirements are quantified with the help of chill models. And these models are also used to describe chill accumulation in a given place. So the chill accumulation of an orchard would determine what tree cultivars are feasible there. Growers have to match the chilling requirements of their tree cultivars with chill that's available in their orchard. An accurate way to anticipate future chill and a good understanding of tree requirements is critical for long-term planning of orchards, and especially in the changing climate that we're currently in. Now let's look at an example. For instance, there's evidence from Turkey and from Iran that tells us that pistachios require about 1,000 chilling hours. A chilling hour is an hour when temperatures are between 0 and 7.2 degrees Celsius. I'll go a bit into detail on that in a few minutes. So this has been determined as the minimum requirement for viable production. The critical question, or the interesting question then, becomes what would production look like if we only had, say, 100 or 200 chilling hours? How would the trees perform if we had a lot less than what's been published as a requirement? Well, maybe like this orchard in Tunisia. Here we also have a pistachio tree, also grown in a commercial orchard, and of course also requiring chill. This is the same cultivar that these estimates from Iran and Turkey were for. It's the same species, same cultivar, but only gets about 10 to 20% of the chilling hours that have been published as the chill requirement of the cultivar. These pistachios are doing all right. Maybe you don't know so much about pistachio trees, but this looks like a fairly productive tree to me. So what is this? Is this evidence of maybe intra-specific variation or intra-cultivar variation? maybe these pistachios of the same cultivar are somehow genetically different in Iran and in Turkey than in Tunisia. Or maybe it's acquired thermal needs. Maybe by being grown in a much warmer place, these trees have somehow adapted to the local environment, which would of course undermine our basic idea that there is a cultivar-specific chilling requirement at all. There's a third option here. This could also be an indication of the inadequacy of the chilling hours metric. Maybe we simply have a model here that doesn't really describe what we were interested in. Based on this observation alone, we can't tell which of these three options it is. Spoiler alert, I can already tell you the correct answer is almost certainly 3. The chilling hours metric that is used very widely for quantifying chill accumulation and chilling requirements of trees is not adequate for measuring it under these conditions. In fact, we have a number of chill models we can choose from. Chilling hours aren't the only one. And most of these models are kind of, in terms of the structure, quite similar. They're so-called temperature sum models, which means we have a temperature record, maybe an hourly record, sometimes a daily record. Most of the models actually require hourly temperatures. And for each hour, we look at the temperature that we're currently experiencing, and then we use a weight function to determine how effectively the trees accumulate chill at a given time. So that's illustrated by this equation here. You see we have the 2 time parameters here, T0, which is when we start accumulating chill. T is the current moment, the current time that we're interested in, and W is this weight function here that determines for each hour that is accumulated between T0 and T how effectively chill was actually accumulated. Maybe that sounds complicated in theory, but it's relatively simple when we look at the chilling hour, how this works in the chilling hours model. So this is the weight function for the chilling hours model, and you can see that it is a relatively simple box-like structure here. Basically, we have a weight of 1 for the temperature range between 0 degrees and 7.2 degrees Celsius, and 0 otherwise, 0 for all other temperatures. So basically this means, well, if temperatures are between 0 and 7.2 degrees Celsius, we have a chilling hour, otherwise we don't. Here's a different model, the so-called Utah model. And you see this weight function is a little bit more complicated here. There are more different weights we can apply here. We can have this full weight here. Once again, we have this 1 here for maximum chill efficiency, but we also have a certain temperature range where we have only half the efficiency, also here and on the warmer end of the spectrum. And we also have an area here when we exceed something like 15.5 degrees, where we actually have negative chill weights, which means that we can destroy again the chill that has already been accumulated in the past. So this has been based on some observations that indicate that chill actually can be negated, so it can be destroyed again even after it has accumulated. Here's an adaptation. So-called positive Utah model was developed in South Africa, where people realized, well, in the Utah model, this negation was actually doing too much. It was taking away all the chill again that was accumulated, and so people have adjusted the model by simply making the negative part go away. Yeah, so now this became even more simple and doesn't actually reflect some of the observations again that, I mean, it has been observed that chill was destroyed by heat. They decided this doesn't actually describe what's happening under our conditions, or it produces numbers that don't fit what we're observing, and so let's make this go away. I should add that there are these step functions, but there are often also adaptations that make this into a continuous function without the steps here. Those adaptations also exist. Sometimes it is quite illustrative, though, to look at where these models come from. Whenever we have multiple models, of course, we have to make a decision. Which one do we now actually use? Does it matter? Let me explore this in a bit more detail now. The first thing we should sometimes do is take a look at where our models actually come from. How much can we trust the process that they originated from? And in this case, when we look at the chilling hours model, we notice in the literature that this model is often associated with a guy called Weinberger, who published a paper in 1950 that is often given as the key reference of the chilling hours model. But if you look at the paper, which most people don't because it's not so easily accessible, but I've taken a look, you realize that he actually did no experiments at all to develop this model in a formal way. And he already even presented evidence that it didn't work that well for the data set he was working on, which was a large data set on multiple cultivars of peach in Georgia in the US. And he even cited an earlier reference as a source. So he didn't invent this model. He actually extracted it from a completely inaccessible publication. And here it is. In the paper, it says that this model was introduced in an unpublished paper presented at the 1932 meeting of the American Society of Horticultural Sciences. Paper in this case doesn't mean actual paper. It means most probably an oral presentation. So this guy, Hutchins, did a presentation at that time in 1932, which inspired Weinberger to use this model in his studies. Here's Lee Milo Hutchins. He's the one who apparently introduced the chilling hours concept to the Horticultural Society at that time. He was a pretty famous and very successful, apparently, phytopathologist, somebody who deals with plant diseases, but he had no apparent expertise, as far as I can tell, on the chill requirements of trees. And there's also no evidence that this model has really been developed in any sort of formal way or extensively validated through experiments. It was claimed at some point, and then through a long string of citations in various papers across generations of scientists, has basically developed into the standard model that most horticulturalists, most orchard managers, and also many horticultural researchers still rely on today. And while I don't think this model is very useful, there's a quote that I found by Lee Milo Hutchins, by the one who presented this model first. And that quote is, "Although we may not understand why, when plants differ from the expected reaction, we must remember the plants are right and we are wrong." So what we can learn from these pistachios in Tunisia and Iran and in Tunisia, in Turkey, to Iran and in Tunisia, is possibly not that there's any sort of biological adaptation going on. It may simply be that the model that we're using, that many people in the literature have used to quantify chilling requirements, is simply incorrect. Now there's one model that's a bit more credible and was actually developed in a formal process, and I want to introduce that to you as well. It's a so-called dynamic model, and this was actually based on extensive controlled temperature experiments by Amnon Eres and his group in the 1970s and 1980s that were done on peaches and in Israel. He is a horticultural scientist, but he collaborated with an expert modeler here. So this is not just the intuition of some orchard scientist. There was an actual physicist involved, Dr. Svetlana Fishman, and she described the dormancy breaking process in a more biologically plausible way than has often been done. So what this team here postulated is that dormancy breaking first requires the production of an intermediate chill product, a precursor of dormancy breaking factor as it's labeled, PDBF in this figure, which is formed through the action of cool temperatures. And the rate at which this happens, so the speed of the reaction here is assumed to follow the Arrhenius law, which is used in chemistry to describe the speed of chemical reactions. So this law is pretty well established, and so we actually have a plausible and credible process here that describes the rate of change that is observed here. Now, this intermediate product in an inverse reaction can be destroyed by heat, also with the rate determined by the Arrhenius law. Once we have a certain amount, a critical amount of this precursor, this gets fixed into a permanent so-called chill portion, which is then labeled the dormancy breaking factor. And this originates once we have a certain amount of this precursor, and this then can no longer be destroyed. These chill portions accumulate throughout the dormancy season, and they determine when the tree is ready to experience heat and eventually build up to bud break. So here's another look at the dynamic model. We know that we have this precursor substance here, which can be destroyed again. And when we have a certain quantum that's accumulated, this gets fixed into a permanent chill portion. The whole thing can be described with the Arrhenius equation. Here it is. And we have two processes here basically that are described by rate constants, K0 and K1. For each of these processes, we have constants here, A0 and A1, and energies of activation, E0 and E1. And the whole thing depends on temperature measured in degrees Kelvin as the driving factor of these processes. Now, I've told you about 4 different chill models: the chilling hours, the Utah model, the positive Utah model, and the dynamic model. And as I mentioned, if we have, there are actually more models. This is not the whole selection, but these are the most commonly used ones. And as I mentioned, when we have multiple models, we have to make a decision as modelers. And quite often that decision is made in a somewhat careless way. Many modelers use the model that seems easiest to use, or the model that they happen to have all input data for. In this case, we only need temperature, so we need to think a bit more about what, maybe we need a more sophisticated process to think about which model to use. But the first question we probably have to explore is, does it even matter? Is it important which model we use? Are they the same? Do they basically describe the same thing in the same way? Then it doesn't matter. Then we can just, see which one is more convenient to apply. But let's see how they respond to similar changes. This was one of the first things I did when I started working in this field. I looked at the chill accumulation over a period of, I think, 25 years, somewhere in California. So here's the distribution for the different models for chilling hours for the Utah model, the positive Utah model, and the dynamic model. And this is all normalized here so that the long-term average, or the median rather, or not the average, is set to 1 here. Yeah, so the box plots here indicate variation around this median, this average. So this was for about 1950, and now let's look at what happens when we use a future climate scenario that we may be interested in the context of climate change. We see that these models respond very differently. We see declines in all models, so all of these are below 1 for the future scenario. That's probably what we expected, because as it gets warmer, of course, it gets less chilly. But we see that the dynamic model and the positive Utah model, they only show a change of about a decline of about 20% in chill accumulation, whereas the Utah model and especially the chilling hours are much more sensitive. So chilling hours in Utah models far more sensitive than the other models. And another informative comparison we can make is to look at the ratio between models across locations. Because if we divide one of the metrics, let's say that we divide chilling hours by chill portions in a particular place, then of course we get a ratio. And if this ratio is the same everywhere, if basically the models are proportionally equivalent, then it really probably doesn't matter which of the models we use. And maybe if there's only a slight variation in these ratios, we may also still be okay. Unfortunately, that's not the case. So what is shown here is calculation of such ratios for a set of more than 5,000 weather stations, and then I made a map of this for the whole world. So here we see chilling hours divided by chill portions. And as you can see, the range here is enormous. In some places, in the tropics, especially the warmer climates, one chill portion actually corresponds to 0 chilling hours. Well, maybe that's not so interesting. But on the other end of the spectrum, it's a bit hard to see in this map here, we reach up to 30. We have places where one chill portion corresponds to 30 chilling hours. So this whole spectrum here is observable on our planet. And even between areas that we may be quite interested in, let's say we may be interested in comparing requirements here between Central Europe and maybe southern Spain. Between these locations already, we find a difference in this ratio from something like maybe 20-22 to what could it be, 8 or so. So this is a massive difference. And we can also go back to our pistachio example and look at what we see in Turkey. We have a ratio here of maybe something like 15 or so between chilling hours and chill portions. And here in Tunisia, this range is probably around 4 or 5. So assuming that chilling hours are a bad model and chill portions are more correct, there's quite a few indication that that's the case. We can already infer here that if we use the wrong model, if we use chilling hours to estimate our chilling requirements, the information we get here for transferring cultivars, for example, from one place to another, or evaluating the requirements in different geographies, may be completely misleading. We may be completely off if we use such a poor model in such contexts. The ratios are not at all constant, and the models are clearly not equivalent. So we really need to think hard about which model to use, and we probably need a bit of work to validate which one is actually closest to the truth. Let's go back to the dynamic model, because it is the most credible one. In my view, it has a plausible biological theory. It is based on some basic laws of biology. Still contains a lot of assumptions, but at least this was developed in a formal and systematic process. But unfortunately, what comes out of this is quite a bit more complicated and complex than what horticultural researchers are used to. We've seen these very, very simple weight functions earlier for all the other chill models, and what's in this paper is pretty strong stuff. It's very difficult to read and to understand. I certainly did not succeed when I tried, and it has been a huge barrier to adoption and to species-specific parameterization of the model. Usually there are, of course, these activation constants and or the activation energies and constants and rate constants that we should fix. We should determine for each cultivar and each species, but that hardly ever happens because the model is so complex. But even in the raw form, even in the form that has been published, there's an Excel spreadsheet that's been circulating in the horticulture and the dormancy modeling sphere. Even in that form, without adapting any of the parameters of the model, this has already proven more accurate than the other models. So let's see what the dynamic model predicts for our planet. This map here shows chill levels around the year 2000 across different geographies. And what you can see here is this blue band that stretches across basically the temperate zones of our planet. And once again, you see it here in the southern hemisphere, not so much in Africa, but all the way here in South America, you can see it again. And this is really the prime territory for many of the fruit trees that we're interested in. But we also see quite a few of them, quite a few orchards of similar species in the area that's shown in yellow here. Southern Mediterranean region, North Africa, or even in South Africa, that which looks rather orange here, we find quite a few deciduous fruit trees. Certainly also in southern Australia, lots of them in China. So those are also places that are interesting for growers of such trees. And these are arguably more at risk of changes, because currently the chill levels there are quite a bit lower than what we find in the prime locations. In Central Europe here, we are in a really high chill environment. The UK is still a bit chillier, and the Pacific Northwest in the US and Canada. But we have a lot of chill here, probably around 100, 120, sometimes even more chill portions according to the dynamic model. Here in southern Spain, we're only at about 40 to 60 maybe. And this is also true for many of the other interesting growing regions for temperate fruit trees. And since they currently already have so little chill, we, or the growers there, are severely worried about climate change. And here's what the projections say. What you see here now is predicted changes since, well, the baseline scenario in 1975. Anything shown in blue in these maps indicates a strong increase in chill, plus 40 chill portions, whereas dark red would mean minus 40. Now, the upper map here shows changes by the middle of the 21st century. And you see that here we already have quite a few regions that are shown in orange and yellow. All of these are expected to experience decreasing winter chill already by this time, pretty soon. This gets even worse by the end of the 21st century. Understandably, climate change is progressing throughout the century and conditions will get warmer. But here we find conditions that are really troubling. Remember I told you that in the Mediterranean region we only currently have something like 40 to 60 chill portions, and now we're losing 40 of them. That means in many places, according to this model and the climate scenarios this is based on, we will lose winter chill entirely. Which means, according to our understanding of biology, it should no longer be possible to grow many species there that have been cultivated, in some cases for thousands of years. So one of our missions is to help prepare growers for these changes that are probably coming their way. So we're working on ways to do state-of-the-art chill risk assessment. What is following now is a bit of a teaser for a master's module that we're currently preparing. This is supposed to be first taught in the winter semester. So if you're interested in chill modeling, chill risk assessment, climate risk assessment in general, keep that in mind. Maybe that is of interest for you. For doing state-of-the-art chill risk assessment, we need hourly temperature records. This is what all of the credible models require as input. We need a credible model in the first place. Currently, that is the most credible one is the dynamic model. It's been pretty firmly established. We should be looking at historic trends in a particular region to know what's been going on, and we should consider many future scenarios. This is the state of the art in chill risk or in climate risk assessment in general. Since we don't know what the future will hold, we should be looking at lots of scenarios to bracket the range of climates we may be expecting in the future. We should use realistic weather projections, not just work with the average weather, but actually look at the distribution of different temperature situations that we may experience. We should assess the risk of chill shortfall, not just the means. There's no particular use for a grower to know the mean chill level in his orchard. He should know the chance of having less than a particular amount of chill so he can actually select cultivars with appropriate requirements. And this full state of the art is very rarely achieved in the literature. So I since I've been working on this topic quite a bit, I get to review lots of papers on it, and I can say in most cases the studies that are coming out really fall short of this standard. And most assessments have severe deficiencies, or they aren't even done. Sometimes I have more confidence in those researchers who realize that they can't do the whole thing, and there's too many uncertainties involved, and so they don't even do the study, don't publish it, and don't try to publish it in the first place. Because there are major challenges here. First of all, we quite often don't have hourly temperature data. This dynamic model, as I mentioned, is quite complicated, and most people aren't easily able to adapt it to their needs. We often have no long-term data. Data processing is a challenge when you want to work with 15, 20 climate scenarios. That means a lot of work if you want to do things by hand. Realistic weather projections are pretty hard to produce, and also the statistical appraisal of kind of chill distributions for past or future scenarios can be quite difficult. So I've been working on a tool to make these things easier and help people do this better. The tool is called ChillR, and again, this is going to be kind of the main content of the module in the winter semester, where we get some hands experience in modeling chill and using this R package and digging our way a bit deeper into modeling things in R in general. This R package, which is freely available on the R website, aims to facilitate chill assessments. It's an open source contributed package. It's on CRAN, R's official server, and I've successively added functions to this since 2013, which means the structure is a little bit chaotic sometimes, as often happens with things that grow over time, but it is still rather useful, I think. And this automates many data processing and analysis steps in phenology analysis. And I'm hoping that this can help overcome this major bottleneck that stands between horticultural scientists, that plans the ambitions that they have in terms of predicting chill and helping orchard managers adapt, and well, the useful assessments that we should really produce in order to make that happen. One of the first challenges in a chill assessment is to get historic temperature records for the site that we're interested in. Sometimes we have temperature records and we have a weather station maybe at the site that we care about, and then we don't have this problem, but quite often we do. So I've included here a function to access a major database that contains lots of historic temperature data. This is the global summary of the day database by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration of the United States. You can access this function or this database by using a simple, basically one-line command in R after you've installed the ChillR package, and this then gives you a list of weather stations that are close to the place that you're interested in. You see here we've selected coordinates that correspond to the location of Istanbul in Turkey, and we now have a list here of weather stations in the database that are close to Istanbul, and the distance here is indicated in the distance column. The closest one is 15 kilometers away. This is Ataturk Airport, and then, well, quite a number more at increasing distance from the site that we're interested in. One more command, and then a quick conversion function. So once again, we use actually the same command. It's handle GSOD in this case. Just here we had specified the action list stations, and here we specify the action download weather, and we indicate the ChillR code of the station that we're interested in, the first one in the list, and afterwards we convert this to ChillR format, and this is what that function returns. So in this case, well, this is not a complete record. There are all kinds of gaps. That's why I'm showing you a section from sort of the middle of the data set for 1986. But you can see here that we have now a record for every day of the minimum temperature, the maximum temperature, the mean temperature, and also the precipitation. The numbers look a bit funny. Reason being, in this database, all temperatures are stored as degrees Fahrenheit, and once you convert them, sometimes these numbers start looking a little funny. Next, we have to prepare the temperature data for chill assessment, and the first thing you usually have to do is to patch up some gaps in the weather record. Most of the time, in this database at least, the records aren't complete. ChillR contains functions for patching the records with data from other stations by adjusting them for differences between stations and then using them to fill in gaps. You can then also produce hourly data based on idealized temperature curves with a simple function here. You see stack hourly temperatures here applied to the weather record, and well, in addition to that, provided with the latitude, because that's important for knowing when the sun sets and when the sun rises. You get a temperature curve here that reflects sort of the way that temperatures usually develop during the day. And we see that at the time of sunrise, which in this case is here, we have approximately the minimum temperature of the day, and then the day starts warming up until it reaches its maximum around 2 p.m. and then temperatures start declining again until, well, in a following sort of a sine curve until sunset, and afterwards we have this logarithmic decay function until the next sunrise. There's also a function included in ChillR that I don't want to talk about on interpolating gaps in hourly temperature records, which is somewhat challenging, but has also been implemented here now. I've also recently added a function that does not require on this idealized, this kind of optimal temperature curve, but which can basically be calibrated with hourly or sub-daily observations from the location you're interested in, and then make hourly temperature records that reflect more or less the weather situation in the place that you're interested in. Next challenge is to compute chill and heat metrics. We already talked about the chill models. There are also heat models that are a little bit more straightforward, probably not more credible than the chill models. But for making a proper assessment of agroclimatic conditions in our orchard, we now have to calculate chill and heat. And to make this easy, I've added a one-line code for computing common chill and heat metrics. It's shown here. Chilling is the command. There are also some slightly more complex commands for doing slightly different things. But basically, what this does is it takes an hourly temperature record, it takes a start date and an end date, and then it calculates a number of chill metrics. First of all, a summary, how many days in this record have actually been interpolated, so how many gaps were there, how complete was the data record, and then what were the chilling hours, Utah model chill units, chill portions according to the dynamic model, and growing degree hours for every season on record. So this is all calculated just with this one line of code, and it doesn't really require us to get into the detailed functions of the dynamic model or any of those things. This is all implemented in these functions, and that is really the beauty of programming, learning to program things in R. Because you have to figure something out once, like on one occasion you make the effort of converting the complicated equation of the dynamic model into an R function, and afterwards you just keep using the function. You never have to do this again. You're done. You can build on you can make use of your future work by just calling of your past work by just calling the function that you've developed once. There are also separate functions for several metrics, for the chilling hours Utah model, but also for a few others. And there's a capability for implementing additional temperature-based models. So there's a bit of flexibility here. You can also add your own models if you want to compute something else. Now for evaluating past data, once again we have a simple function to produce summary plots for historic data. Make chill plot in this case is the function applied to the chill results, so to the results that we just computed on the last slide. And here's the the summary of here's basically the chill history again for Istanbul in Turkey since 1945. You see there are lots of data gaps here. So for the years with the asterisk here, there wasn't enough data to show anything, because we have set a threshold here of 10% of the data we could have missing, but no more than that. So if more is missing, then the data will not be shown here. But for all the other years, we had enough data to get a feeling for how chill has developed over time. Usually there's still a color gradient here to indicate how many data points are really available. In this case, this doesn't really show because the records were pretty complete in all cases. We may also want to do temperature scenarios. Maybe it's not enough for us to just look at the historically observed chill. We may actually want to know what was normal at a given point in time, like what is normal now, or what was normal in 1950, or what will be normal in the future. To produce such temperature records that give us an idea of what normal conditions really are, I've included here a weather generator that produces synthetic weather replicates, so to say, that can be stochastically evaluated. This is useful for probabilistic risk assessment. So what is basically done by this function here is that we take the historically observed weather, we calculate some statistics based on it, and then we use these statistics to randomly generate plausible years of weather, or years of plausible weather. So for example, if I'm interested in the typical weather at a given place, I can analyze the historic record and then generate a population of 100 or even 1,000 years of representative weather that may be observed in this particular location. The calls get a little bit more complicated here. I'm not going to go through them in detail, but I'll show you a little bit anyway. So what you see here is really, once again, a one-liner. It's temperature generation. That's what the weather generator does. And then based on the weather that comes out of this, once again, we're applying the chill function and then showing, well, a histogram of the chill distribution that we've observed in Istanbul. And this is what comes out of this. So here we have now plausible weather, probable weather, possible weather for Istanbul for 100 simulated years, typical years that represent the time period indicated by these years here, 1970 to 2010. So according to the typical weather at Istanbul, the most probable chill accumulation here is something like 63 chill portions, but pretty much anything between about 45 and 75 chill portions is possible. These are quite unlikely. This is also somewhat unlikely, but a little bit more plausible. The most likely range is, well, somewhere around here. So this is now sufficient information for anyone who has an orchard in this location to decide what the most appropriate chilling requirement for the trees that he wants to plant are. We may not only be interested in scenarios from the past, but also for the future. And for this, I've included here a function that downloads climate metrics from the Climate Wizard database, which contains site-specific climate change ensemble data. Because for climate change analysis, we should be looking at the output of lots of climate models, which is usually pretty hard to find, hard to come by, but this database has assembled much of such information. And you can access it by entering the coordinates of your location here into this one-line command, get climate wizard data, and then you have to set a few options here at the back, the RCP scenario, for example, and the time period that you're interested in. And then you get this kind of output. So here we have now Tasman1 means the minimum temperature in January according to a number of global climate models, comes out of this function, and not only for January, also for all other months and we also have the maximum temperatures for all month according to all these models. Now this is sufficient data for, again, generating scenarios with this weather generator that can then be used to generate hourly temperature curves according to the functions we discussed earlier. And if we combine many of these functions that I just talked about, the code gets a little bit longer. Maybe this already looks scary, but it is actually a relatively concise set of functions still for generating something that is rather complex and, well, in my view, goes beyond what most scientific papers on chill risk assessment contain. Here's the result of that, of these lines of code, well, of similar lines of code applied not to Istanbul, but for Tunisia again, so the location where these pistachios that I showed you earlier were cultivated. And what's shown here is historic and future chill in Tunisia. We managed to publish this a couple of years ago. And I'm going to quickly walk you through what this plot shows. Basically, we have here the chill accumulation in chill portions, according to this dynamic model again, shown on the y-axis, for a number of scenarios. This is the historic scenario here, with all the blue dots indicating observed chill, or chill calculated from observed temperatures in each of the years of the past. Now these box plots here are typical distributions of chill that represent the conditions at a particular time. So here's a scenario for 1975 where I used the weather generator to calculate typical weather conditions for this point in time and then generate 100 plausible years for this period, or for this year. What you can see here is that this time the normal chill, what was usually observed, was somewhere between, well, 38 maybe and 45 chill portions, but anything basically within the range indicated by this box plot was plausible. Now this has already declined quite substantially. Already by 2000, this you can see how the box plot has moved down here, and by approximately now, a few years ago, this has declined even further. Now this is quite concerning because the green area here is the approximate chill need of pistachios. So you can see that based on the historic record alone, we see a situation where an orchard manager growing pistachios here would have had a, well, 90% chance or something in 1975 of meeting the chilling requirements of his pistachios. Today, we're at approximately a 50-50 chance of not having enough chill. And this can have very serious implications for crop yields. And what is even more concerning is what we see when we look at future scenarios. Because here we have a moderate warming scenario and a strong warming scenario, again indicated by these representative concentration pathways. 4.5 here as an intermediate warming scenario and 8.5 the strongest warming scenario that's usually used. And we have 2 points in time, 2055 and 2085 for both scenarios. And I mean, usually, well, and what you see down here is according to 18 climate models, the distributions that are plausibly expected by these particular in these particular scenarios. Now, usually you'd go into a lot of details here in analyzing, well, this model says this and that model says something else, and this RCP makes certain projections and another one makes different projections. In this particular case, for this particular pistachio grower, you don't really have to do much of that because you can be pretty sure, at least again according to our biological understanding, that for all of these scenarios we're going to fall short of what the pistachios need. Yeah, so unless our understanding of the biology here is completely off, pistachios will no longer be viable in any of these future scenarios in central Tunisia. So to make sense of these distributions of chill over, say, 100 plausible years, we can use the metric of safe winter chill. Safe winter chill is a 10% quantile of these typical chill distributions. It means it is the number where only 10% of all years have less chill than a given than that number. It's illustrated here in this figure. You see here these typical distributions for different points in time, and what's shown here also, well, this is for chilling hours. It doesn't really matter which model we use here. The concept works for all of them. You see here the mean winter chill first, indicated by the black line. Now, if I had trees that required this much chill, I would basically face a situation where in 1 out of 2 years, I probably wouldn't get enough. So this would be very unfortunate because this has yield implications. This is why we should rather be using the red line here, which is safe winter chill. And you see this is the lower whisker of the box plot, meaning that below this, we only have 10% of all the values. So if I grow a tree that requires this much chill, I should expect there to be enough for this tree. I should expect it to fulfill its requirement in 90% years and 90% of all the years. And this is something that I imagine is probably economically viable for an orchard. There can be some failures, and even if I fall a little bit short, it may not be a complete failure. There can be some chill deficient years, but there shouldn't probably be more than about 10%. Yeah, so this level of chill is exceeded in 90% of years, and I think this is probably economically tolerable. It certainly is more meaningful than this mean, which, as I said, would require a 50% chance of inadequate chill, which is really not desirable. Here's an example of how we've applied this recently in Chile. Here's a map of Chile. Chile is sort of the perfect country for climate gradient studies because it's really long and spans quite a number of different time zones. And so here we have a total of 9 locations in Chile, and we've done assessments of safe winter chill for these different places. This is the work of Eduardo Fernandez, who's also involved in one of the groups in this class. And what you see here is this temperature gradient going from Vallenar here in the north all the way to Osorno, which is in the very south of this study region here. You can see a clear gradient, so the safe winter chill is indicated by this color scheme here, with blue meaning a lot and, well, red meaning very little. You can see this gradient here clearly reflected in the chill levels that we see. And for the future, we also see, well, roughly the same pattern preserved, but we do see some changes in color by 2050 and by 2085. This is for now for two RCPs again, 4.5 and 8.5, and yeah, for these two points in time, and for a total of 15 climate models. So what we see here is a rough snapshot of what we can expect in terms of safe winter chill in the future for orchards in Chile. You could, of course, go into a lot more detail, but for a quick overview of the situation along the entire climate gradient, such a concise figure can be quite informative. Now, what can we do? Of course, we can do these assessments, and then we would very much like to give recommendations to orchard managers on what to do. In principle, it's relatively straightforward. We know as temperatures rise, we will have certain adaptation needs. At the beginning, we'll probably be okay for some time because there's some plasticity in the present cultivars, which means they won't necessarily die immediately if we don't get enough chill. They can tolerate a certain amount of chill shortfall, but we're not entirely sure how much that really is. We can adjust our management to some extent. There are some ways of influencing the microclimate in the orchard. There are some chemicals that people are allowed to spray in certain parts of the world for breaking dormancy. It's very problematic in Germany because some of them are rather toxic and not allowed here. But at some point we will have to introduce new cultivars. And so we will have to find tree cultivars whose climatic requirements are more attuned to the conditions we're expecting in the future. At some point we may have to look for new species when, for example, we find that there are no cherries anymore with the right chilling requirements for our location. And at some point, possibly, we may have to abandon completely the production of tree crops or move to some species that simply don't have any chilling requirements. So this is the principle. It's not particularly complex or surprising, I guess, to anyone. But the key question that derives from this is which measures are quantitatively appropriate. If I have an orchard here in the Rhineland, I'm certainly not at the point where I have to abandon tree crop production, but are we looking for new cultivars? Or are we looking for new species? Or can we possibly get away with just adjusting our management a little bit? Or don't we have to do anything? Are our trees plastic enough that they can cope with a bit of change? To decide this, we really require accurate chill models. And we need accurate and reliable ways to quantify chill. Otherwise, it's very difficult to make this call and give any reasonable recommendations to people on how to adjust, how to adapt to the new conditions. You're starting to look a little tired. And also this file is starting to reach the size limit for eCampus, so we'll have to split it into parts, and that means it's a nice opportunity for a coffee break. But please, for more insights on phenology modeling, move on to the third part of this lecture after you're done with your coffee.